Alright, so I know that I already said in the last chapter that I was just going to try and do this like every other week or whatever, but I guess to make up for things, I'm going to try and take a look at this one, chapter 9, because this one's actually pretty short compared to the others, and honestly, if I can just crank out more of these chapters, I wouldn't mind it. Previously on Empress Theresa, what else am I supposed to say? More character shilling, all that stuff, like just talking about how great she is on the news, and but this time she went to a rich British house and Steve is with her, and that's pretty much all there is. This one is thankfully short, but let's get on with this. Chapter 9. I went over the ideas I put in the Mission Impossible file. They had been for communicating with a nonverbal alien, a machine or something, but I thought the MI ideas could be adapted to HAL. But before I used these math theories, I would have to get some response from HAL. This became the first priority. I had to get him to respond to something. I did, in effect, get him to develop a new reflex that I could gradually modify in small steps to do something else. Animal trainers did this. Somebody had once taught a rhinoceros to walk a tightrope. I should be able to get Hal to do something. My real work began. I tried to get Hal to respond in 4 ways. One was to slide a small coin between 2 glasses on a table. I'd place a coin next to one glass, leave it there a moment, and then put my finger on it to slide it to the other glass. After doing this a few times, I'd place the coin at the first glass and wait a while to see if Hal would move it for me. The second thing I did was a takeoff on the throwing accuracy skill that Hal gave me. I tossed a coin in a small metal can a few feet away. Keeping my eyes on the can's opening, I got the coin inside the can every time. Then I'd toss a coin with my eyes shut. Once in a while, the coin would go into the can by pure chance, but generally it missed. Hal hadn't caught on to the idea yet. The third thing I did was stand up and drop a coin on the floor beside the can while keeping my eyes on the can's opening. If Hal got the idea, he would move the coin into the can. I was not throwing the coin, I was dropping it. If Hal guided the coin to the can, it was a new reflex using elements of an old one. I could then try changing it by dropping the coin with my eyes shut. Hal's response to this would be a radical jump of some sort. I'd be on the way to changing one of his reflexes step by step. The fourth thing I did was entirely different. I suspended a 1-foot ruler on a piece of string. The string was attached to the end of a yardstick, held in place with a book on top of a bookshelf. After steadying the foot ruler, I pointed to its end for a moment to give Hal a chance. Then I pushed the ruler's end to make it rotate 100 degrees or so. This maneuver had nothing to do with coins, or throwing, and it would seem to require very little of Hal, just a tiny push. Hal didn't respond. I tried all day the first day on the job, but Hal didn't respond. How long would I have to try these stupid things before getting results? Would it drive me crazy first? Makes me wonder, why doesn't she get, like, training for this? I mean, everybody says that she's, like, strong enough to just kill everybody if she wanted, so, like, I don't know. Meanwhile, Steve was going over the mail that had been pre-selected by the Scotland Yard people for checks. At one night's supper, he said, "People are sending larger checks. We already have $1 million. Really? In 1 week? 1 week. The checks are getting really big. That will help. We can't get regular jobs." We could not. The idea of going out and getting jobs after all this was getting jobs after all this was over was out of the question. We would be pestered by crowds of curious people wherever we went. No employer would want 1,000 reporters camped out in front of his building. Days went by. I did my coin and measuring stick tricks with no response from Hal. It was incredibly boring work. Added to the boredom was the tremendous pressure I was under. To fail would mean the death of everybody. Nobody could know what I went through. It wasn't much easier on Steve, who felt he was supposed to be taking care of me, but could do little. He felt he should be giving some useful ideas, but he had none. Steve soon realized that when I broke the code to Hal, if ever, I would need advice about the mechanics of motion in order to control Hal. Any movement of matter required consideration of many parameters. This was the realm of physics, and he was a physics major. He missed his college textbooks, but instead of arranging to have them sent from home, he decided to make a trip to Cambridge University and buy some. He and Arthur drove to Cambridge to visit the bookstore. He quickly found the physics section and selected 15 books. Somebody recognized him while he was on his way to the checkout, and he was soon followed by a crowd. "Hello," said several people. Steve merely smiled politely without speaking to show he wasn't interested in conversation. They respectfully didn't push the point. Somebody who looked like a college professor said, "Why doesn't your wife appear on television?" I thought she always did. Okay. He answered, "People wouldn't like her. She's too perfect." I hope that's sarcasm. The people who heard this remark got the idea. Thousands of newspaper and magazine articles about me had failed to uncover a single flaw in my character. I hate this. I freaking hate this. There was nothing controversial to hold people's interest. It would be like interviewing a nun. A nun that dresses skimpy, apparently. When the remark reached the press, it opened the door to talking about my morality. Anybody who'd known me since birth was considered fair game for questioning about my... I hate this so much. Who talks like this in real life? You'd have to be like a freaking 64-year-old that doesn't understand, like, how women are, heck, even how humans talk. Anyway, let me read what I just looked into. Anybody who'd known me since birth was considered fair game for questioning about my sexuality, religious beliefs, and social opinions. Who cares about your sexuality? You're married to a man, for goodness sake. Reporters cornered Father Richard Donati and asked him to comment on my personality. He had a memorized answer. This chapter's the same thing. This chapter is the same thing. I'm like stuck in purgatory if I believed in purgatory. He had memorized the answer. "Let's hear atheists explain a miracle like Theresa. She is a bright girl, but she has a simple personality. She knows there is evil in the world. It doesn't affect her. She has simple needs. She doesn't seek what is not hers. She accepts what God gives her. She was born a great burden for 8 years with no complaints. She is the sanest person I know. We will see if a good girl with no unreasonable ambitions can do good in the world. We believe what we know. We know Theresa. Believe in her also. The lesson is anybody can be as fine a person as Theresa if only they'll try." I'm not going to really try if it means being like her at this point. "Someone who wants to do God's will has an invincible ally. Theresa can't be defeated. I have hope she succeeds. I have hope she is the benevolent power. I hope." He told me hope is never giving up. How many people noticed Father Donati's statement didn't identify my religion? I learned something from him. Don't try too hard selling your agenda, and you will sell your agenda. If I wanted to lead the world, I would do it by waiting for people to ask me to lead. The day after Father Donati's statement, President Stinson said something that gave people a new focus on my story. She was at a press conference. After the usual questions one would expect from reporters about the current state of the world, someone asked her to characterize the Theresa Hartley situation. President Stinson seemed to speak spontaneously, which made it stick. "We're all trying to understand what's going on. This is new territory. We're not being invaded by an alien race or attacked by an unexplained force. Hal is neither an alien nor a force. From now on, whatever happens will be 100% Theresa's responsibility. This is a story like none we've ever heard. An 18-year-old girl is single-handedly driving world events. Heaven help us all." 10 days had gone by since I arrived at the Parker place. The constant games I played with the coins and hanging ruler were becoming oppressive. The Prime Minister came around to talk to Steve. She hadn't made any progress. Steve told him, "The theory is Hal adapts his structure to the host's activity, and it becomes a reflex. There's no other way to explain what Hal does. There's one problem with that. How long will it take? Hal has been around for billions of years. How long does it take before he picks up a new reflex? The matter is urgent. She may succeed, but too late. That's the problem. Next page. Hal stopped the wind when she fell from a plane. Okay, maybe this is somebody else. I don't know who's talking again. Hal stopped the plane when she fell from the stopped the wind when she fell from a plane. Have you considered asking her to take another plane ride? We have, and we'll try. We'll try it when the time is right. We don't have much hope for the idea. Hal may have a reflex to respond to something, but how do you get him to reverse that reflex? How do you tell him to undo it? He stopped the wind. Case closed. Steve checked the mail almost every day. Packages had been sent through to him after the British security people checked them for bombs or poisons. A tube came in. He opened it and found a life-size poster of me. It was a photograph taken of me at the hotel where I met the Prime Minister. It showed me walking from the elevators to the meeting room for the first of our 3 sessions. I wore my famous Irish green outfit, copied by women all over the world. Okay, apparently she's like, I don't know, an icon at this point, all that stuff. People copying her like within a few days. He taped it to the wall of his bedroom. When I saw it, I asked, "Where did you get this?" "A poster company sent it. They're going to put it on sales next week. I'll bet it's a hint." "So now I'm a pinup girl," I smiled. Smiling at that, if... yeah, perfect following... More days passed with no progress in getting Hal to develop a new reflex. Word came over the airways that farmers' crops planted only a few weeks before had stopped growing. Plants that should have been a foot tall were only a few inches. Without rain, soon the crops would be a failure. On one of our walks around the property, I said, "Do you know how long I've been here?" "3 weeks, isn't it?" "That's 20 days in this place." "Want to go for a ride, little girl?" "I have to get out of here for a few days." "All right, we'll go somewhere." "Where do you want to go?" "Paris." Ah, so this is where the Paris stuff comes in. I heard that there's like some, I don't know if it's like getting into like xenophobic, but it goes into like anti-French stuff from what I've heard. If that's the case, at least we're getting into something interesting. A trip to Paris without being recognized seemed like an impossibility for us, but a phone call to the Prime Minister made it feasible. First, some government security people in unmarked cars drove us from London down to the coast. Then a 50-foot Royal Navy boat, with no markings to distinguish it from a private yacht, snuck us across the English Channel. Another pair of cars drove us to Paris, where we were registered under false names in a small, quiet hotel 200 feet from the Champs Elysees. I don't know what this word is. With dark glasses, my hair piled up on my head, and Steve wearing floppy hats to change his profile. We would be free to walk out of the hotel and roam the streets. We arrived late at night and went to bed thinking that everything would be closed after 9 o'clock. After a continual breakfast, coffee, a muffin, and 1 piece of toast, which helped explain why French girls were so skinny, we set out to see the Champs Elysees. I don't know, I'm probably butchering this, is like French. This is a broad avenue about 1¼ mile long with the Arc of Triumph. I thought it was Arc de Triomphe. Arc of Triumph at one end, and the I suck with French names, and the Louvre not far from the other end. It was lined with French restaurants, movie theaters, and expensive shops. French anti-banalization laws made it difficult for a foreign chain store to open anything here. It was nearly all French, or more accurately, it was nearly all Parisian, if that's how you say it, for the Champs-Élysées, which was the most expensive strip of land in Europe, and the Parisians wanted it to remain so. We walked casually down the avenue. Surprisingly, There were not that many people. We would have thought there would be no breathing room on this famous street. Where was everybody? Perhaps the people were all in the shops and restaurants. We'd check it out later. Near the end of the avenue, the buildings stopped, and the street was lined with trees and lawns. Just a short distance away to the left was the famous Louvre, the world's most visited art museum. Immediately inside the door was the world-famous Venus de Milo, I don't know, and the almost as famous winged victory of Samothrace, whatever these words are. A headless statue of a winged goddess, Nike. Of the winged goddess? These were just the entrance foyer. We entered the main museum and wandered. Often we recognized a painting. In one large gallery were huge paintings, including the huge one by David. Huge paintings, including the huge one by David. The coronation of Emperor Napoleon, which at the length of 30 feet would not fit well in your living room. There were some 150 people standing in a church in this painting. A museum map showed the way to the Mona Lisa. We'd expected a large painting, but it was only 30 inches tall. Furthermore, it was a recess in the wall covered over by a light-absorbing, darkened glass to protect it from flash cameras. It was not impressive, and there were only a few people looking at it. Not a crowd, as you would think the world's most famous painting would attract. Wow, they're really dissing on the Mona Lisa. That's... wow. How respectful. Especially coming from somebody writing a book of this quality, shall I say. I'm past the point of trying to act charitable with this. We continued wandering around the museum until about noon. But then we'd had enough and went outside to take the short walk down to the Notre Dame Cathedral. It was smaller than we expected. It was basically a pile of stone erected around 1200, and the large pillars holding up the roof didn't leave much room for the people. There were no pews. Everybody had to stand. The artwork was pre-Renaissance and rather unspectacular after our visit to the Louvre. It was disappointing. Wow, she's such a... I can't say the word. I can't say it. We left and found the subway system to go to the Eiffel Tower. The subway didn't drop us off at the tower, however, but a half-mile away. By the time we walked to the tower, we had already seen enough of it, but here we were. So we went up to the lower observation platform for a decent look at the city, which, however, was not much to look at. It was just unrecognizable buildings extending to the horizon. By now, both of us were beginning to wonder what was the allure of Paris. Why do Americans visit Paris? I asked. I don't know. Hype, I guess. It was only a tired old city. American cities offered as much. I miss the chipmunks. I said. Let's go find one. There aren't many in Europe, I checked. People must be crazy to live here without chipmunks. What are they talking about? Exactly. We returned to the Champs-Élysées and wandered around. After this, we went to the hotel to cool off and wait for the nightlife. Maybe this disastrous trip could be saved yet. We were learning that when you go somewhere, make sure there's something to do when you arrive. It's not even a disastrous trip. You're just being like an ungrateful jerk, supposedly, for being the person with like a big heart. Like, my goodness, show some freaking respect. We went out at 9. Now the Champs-Élysées was crammed with people. Crowds of the beautiful people were filled the avenue. Paris, or at least this part of it, was a night town. We were looking for a nightclub of some kind, but didn't find one, which made us wonder what these beautiful people did down here. We found a second-floor restaurant and went in. It was a large room, but instead of wrapping up supper, people were only now arriving. Many tables were still empty but filling up. This was what the Parisians did at night. They met friends and acquaintances at the restaurants for meals and conversations that lasted hours. The Champs-Élysées had just begun its evening. These people would not get home until 3 in the morning. Look at that, I said. It's almost 10, and they're just getting here. When do they sleep? We stood 20 feet from the door and waited politely to be conducted to a table. 4 of the beautiful Parisians walked by us, and without their even breaking stride, a waitress met them, as if by previous arrangement, and led them to a table. We waited. 2 minutes later, another Parisian couple walked by us, and were immediately led to a table. I noticed that all the women in the room were dressed in beautiful clothes, while me and Steve were dressed in American casual. While these Parisians probably considered no which these Parisians probably considered no better than potato sacks. Even Steve was beginning to notice this. Don't worry, Myrtle, he said. I'm sure Uncle Homer is feeding the cows while we're gone. Is that a reference? Like it's just flying over my head, whatever. I noticed a man in tie and daytime jacket standing along the far wall. He was fully alert, not a patron apparently. When he saw me looking at him, he looked away. I looked around the room. There was another man standing discreetly in a far corner, and another standing to an emergency exit. There's security people all over the place, I said. I noticed. It looks like they don't get fed either. They must have followed us all day. How did they get in here? The minutes ticked by as other Parisians walked around us and were seated. Steve suggested, maybe American slobs are supposed to seat themselves. Let's try it. We walked out on the floor, passing 20 tables to arrive at an empty one close to the middle of the room. Bonjours, said Steve to the people next to us. We sat down. The waitress did not come. We smiled as we waited 10 minutes. 15 minutes, 20 minutes, the well-dressed patrons gave us frequent looks. We didn't feel welcome, but we didn't care. This was an interesting and funny experiment in human psychology. Think they'd agree to throwing us a hot dog? Said Steve. I looked around and thought I saw many more security people. I waved to one to invite him over. After a moment's hesitation, he came to the secret Hartley table. Yes, ma'am. Okay, only a couple minutes. We want to fly to Dublin, Ireland in the morning. Ask them to have somebody who can show us around. Ask us to have somebody who can show us around the city. We want to see people having fun. The man left without a word. You know, said Steve, I'm getting tired of this disguise. He took off his dark glasses and floppy hat. Me too, I said, and took off my dark glasses and let my hair down, shaking my head to make the famous mane spread out. Here we go. Yelps of astonishment and excitement came from around the room. The secret was out. It was now impossible to remain in the restaurant. We would be mobbed. Steve took hold of my hand and said, Come, my dear, we shall not dine here. Now you all are just being stupid doing this in public, my goodness. We got up and walked to the door, giving friendly waves all the way. Steve said, You all come visit us on the farm. Bring the kids, bring your banjo, take your shoes off, you hear? 10 security men met us at the door. There was no longer a reason to avoid getting ourselves noticed. We walked back to the hotel, followed by a growing crowd of people. At the hotel, the crowd had no excuse to go inside. They dispersed. Early the next morning, we were driven out to Charles de Gaulle, airport, for the Aer Lingus flight to Dublin, Ireland. There was a crowd of gawking French to see us off. The curious kept quiet because they were embarrassed by our restaurant experience, described by sullen broadcasters on French television. In Dublin, we were met by Kathleen, who would show us around town. I actually forgot who Kathleen is. I think her name was mentioned earlier. I don't know. This time I wanted to see people instead of museums and historical sites. Kathleen took us to wherever there were people. Public parks, a street festival of sorts that was going on that day, and an afternoon outdoor concert of folk song groups. We were accompanied by a dozen security people wherever we went. The Irish got the idea. I wanted to see the old country without being mobbed. The crowds were kept nearby but didn't crowd us. Kathleen took us to a dance ball, with large Irish folk singing groups dressed in traditional costumes. A part of the floor was kept clear for dancers. We tried out the Irish steps, and a male and female couple from the singing group came down to give us lessons. People laughed at Steve's clumsiness. It was a fun evening. By the third day in Ireland, the crowds were getting too large to keep under control, so we had to go back to England, but the trip was a success. I had unwound. Now, it would be back to work. We got back to the Parker mansion around breakfast time. Mr. Parker and his family took me out in back of the house. Colonel James' soldiers were putting the finishing touches on a large animal enclosure. Who the heck is Colonel James? Like, was that name dropped earlier? I do not recognize that name. It was square-shaped, 80 feet on the edge, and a half-inch metal screening on most of the walls, and glass on some parts. Vertical sheet metal on top of the walls to keep out small animals. A small tree in the center, piles of logs here and there, and little birdhouses on the ground with the doors cut into them, at ground level. Some parts of the walls had a roof to protect from sun and rain. There was an entrance consisting of an outer door and inner door. Opening an enclosure one at a time would prevent the animals' escape. "What's this all about?" I asked Parker. Oh yeah, Parker's British. Steve called when you were in Paris. He said you wanted chipmunks. They should arrive from America today. What is this chipmunk thing? I really don't get it. What is it? Just like, what, as pets? Did they just like them and it's only now brought up? I really don't get this. That afternoon, a courier brought in 25 chipmunks in 10 cat transportation cages. They were released into the enclosure and they immediately disappeared into the piles of logs. I understood. Piles of logs made ideal winter homes for chipmunks. Deep inside there, they had a warm home in the winter, and they were safe from cats and dogs. It was their safe zone. Somebody in America had lots of good advice. "This is terrific, Mr. Parker. Thank you a million times." It was Steve's idea, my dear. I was very happy. It was over 3 weeks since I told Mr. Blair I'd try to save everybody. Okay. I'm pretty sure that chapter was basically just entirely filler. It's just like, oh yeah, let's go to Paris and friggin' roast all of their ancient, like, culture and history and whatnot. Voice crack, sorry. And whatnot, yada yada. But I'd say that's like the best chapter we've had since like chapter 4, I want to say, because at least something different happened. She actually traveled somewhere, even though it really doesn't make any sense. Like, just like, yeah, I feel like doing this. Like, she just wants to do whatever, and she can just kind of go there. It's just like, you know what, I feel like going to Ireland now. Like, shouldn't she be like, what's with these like long vacations? They have like, what, 228 days or something they said until they die? Like, whatever. Oh yeah, and I forgot to say in the last chapter, have a good one. I guess I was too depressed to say that before, but I'll say it twice over just so that I can make up for it. Have a good one.